Insane LAPD Code 3 responses, 37 bone-chilling chases you won't believe happened at midnight. As the clock struck midnight, the streets of Los Angeles transformed into a ghostly battlefield. Sirens wailed in the darkness, sending shivers down the spines of those awake to witness the chaos. In one astonishing incident, a man on a motorcycle darted through traffic, weaving between startled cars like a shadow slipping between dimensions. His reckless speed seemed defiant, a surreal dance of desperation that left onlookers gasping for breath. What drives a person to such madness? The answer lingered in the air, thick with tension. Moments later, another chase erupted. A bright red coupe barreled down Sunset Boulevard, sparks flying as tires screeched against asphalt. Inside, a man gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands, a mixture of fear and exhilaration evident on his pale face. His eyes darted back to the flashing lights closing in behind him. The thrill was intoxicating, the danger was palpable. A crowd had formed, drawn by the spectacle, eyes wide, mouths agape as they murmured in disbelief. What had led this man to this moment? Would he escape? The questions hung heavily in the chilly air. And just when the city thought it had seen the worst, an inexplicable twist emerged. Reports flooded in of a figure cloaked in darkness running alongside the speeding vehicles. Its movements were unnaturally swift, gliding just beyond the reach of human eyes. Was it a ghost? A sociopath? Or something even more sinister? A collective shudder rippled through the crowd as they witnessed this impossible sight. Their hearts thumped in unison, a primal rhythm of fear and fascination. What was this enigma? Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. Back to the chaos. Police cars screeched to a halt, sirens blaring, lights spinning like fireflies trapped in a storm. Those watching gripped their seats, eyes trained on the twisted realities unfolding. The cloaked figure merged with the road, racing up beside the coupe, its eyes reflecting the flashing lights with an eerie glow. The rider inside, oblivious to the supernatural chase, continued his reckless flight, but this new presence seemed to hold its own secrets. What would happen next? As the city held its breath, the midnight air crackled with a sense of impending doom and undeniable curiosity. The chase was far from over. The night grew darker, suffocating the streets with an unsettling stillness, but the chaos refused to subside. The red coupe tore around the corner, tires screeching, leaving a cloud of burning rubber in its wake. In the distance, the sound of sirens harmonized with the thumping of hearts, swelling the tension like a balloon ready to burst. The mysterious figure continued its relentless pursuit, moving with an inhuman speed. Those gathered couldn't understand, it looked almost like a phantom, seamlessly merging with the shadows. Whispered fears passed from mouth to ear. Was it a force of nature? A haunting specter? Or something more diabolical? In the car, the driver felt his pulse quicken as he glanced in the rearview mirror. What he saw sent icy tendrils of dread creeping down his spine. The cloaked form glanced back at him, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. With every passing moment, the gap closed between them, an invisible thread of fate pulling taut. "Keep it together, man," he muttered, desperate to keep fear at bay. He slammed the accelerator down, urging the car to scream down the boulevard. How had he ended up in this bizarre scenario? Memories flooded back, distant laughter, the clink of ice in glasses, an offer too tempting to refuse. A drug deal gone wrong, a misunderstanding that escalated swiftly into a thrilling nightmare. Crowds of onlookers, transfixed and horrified, surrounded the boulevard like macabre spectators at a live horror show. Gasping and sharing frantic glances, they couldn't tell whether to flee or to witness this unfurling dark drama. A woman cried out, voice trembling. "What is that thing? It's not human." A man next to her shot back, "We've got to get out of here." But something deep within them kept them glued to the scene, the urge for thrill, for something beyond the mundane. Smoke billowed from the rear tires, a symphony of chaos echoing through the night. As the coupe sped past parked cars, the cloaked pursuer shadowed it effortlessly, weaving through traffic like it belonged in the abyss. Fear struck the crowd like lightning, spreading whispers ripe with speculation. Was the figure even real? Or just a trick of their minds? The chase escalated, and the driver, heart pounding like a drum, made a desperate decision. He swerved off the boulevard, into the nearby industrial area, dark, daunting, a maze of twisted metal and shadows. As he took a sharp turn, the coupe's back end skidded dangerously close to a trash dumpster. With every second, panic twisted like a knife inside him. Would the figure follow? Was it a hunter or a harbinger? Suddenly, the headlights of an approaching police car sliced through the darkness, illuminating the scene with blinding clarity. The cop's eyes flared wide when he caught sight of the driver, caught in the vortex of this madness. But when he spotted the dark figure sweeping through the alleys, something shifted in him, recognition sparking behind his badge. He reached for his radio, dread pooling in his gut. "We've got a situation here." Then, in a seamless blur, the cloaked figure lunged forward, and in that moment, the world froze. Time stood still as the driver made eye contact with the figure. The look in its eyes mirrored his own fear and desperation. As shouts erupted from the crowd and police readied themselves, a chilling thought pierced through the chaos. What if the real chase wasn't about escape, but about confrontation? And just before everything exploded into chaos again, darkness swallowed the scene, leaving only echoes of terror echoing in the night. The chase had taken a new turn, a revelation hidden in the shadows awaited discovery. What would happen next? The unanswered question echoed in the silence, rippling through the fabric of that dark night. The driver's heart hammered in his chest, thundering like war drums as he watched the figure surge towards him, its movements fluid and unnaturally quick. Adrenaline coursed through him, making his vision sharpen and his senses heighten. He was speeding into a nightmare, and there was no turning back. With the police car's sirens blaring now, the sound sliced through the air, igniting a sense of urgency in the crowd that had been frozen in fear. They began to scatter, some yelling for others to run, scattering like leaves in a storm. One woman tripped and fell, her scream piercing through the chaos, a desperate cry that echoed against the steel and concrete of the industrial district. Faster! He urged his engine, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. He not only had to outrun the figure closing in behind him but also the cops who were now redirecting their attention to the monstrous pursuer. It wasn't just a chase anymore, it felt like a hunt. Around him, shadows moved, stretching into grotesque shapes as the streetlights flickered. Steel beams loomed over his car like the fingers of some mechanical beast, ready to collapse and crush him. He turned sharply, racing deeper into the twisted labyrinth of the industrial area, where light struggled to penetrate. Suddenly, headlights flashed across the rearview mirror, another police car, this one ramming through the debris, trying to box him in. Desperation clawed at his throat. He had to shake them somehow. He slammed on the brakes, half hoping for some miraculous maneuver to unfold as he spun the wheel. The car skidded, tires screeching against the pavement, spinning into what he hoped was an escape route. But luck was a fickle mistress. The last thing he saw before the world tilted into chaos was that vile figure leaping into the air, its cloak billowing like a dark flag of doom. Then he hit something hard, something that felt solid and unforgiving, a metal dumpster or the remnants of a tired old fence. The impact reverberated through his bones, and for a moment, the world spun. Dust filled the air, stinging his eyes. For the briefest second, silence fell, a deceptive moment of tranquility before the storm. He gasped, struggling to regain his composure as the sound of footsteps approached. He tumbled from the vehicle, panic rising as he glanced back. The cloaked figure stood mere feet away, its ghastly visage now illuminated by the flickering light from the broken streetlight. The fear radiating from its eyes felt palpable, pulsating with a life of its own. But this time, the driver was not the only one to notice. It was as if the ghost of the night had awakened. The police were drawing closer, guns raised, shouts calling for the figure to stop. "Get down!" A cop yelled, and the air exploded with crackling sound as shots rang out, reverberating off the cold concrete walls that he dropped to the ground, the world around him a chaotic theater of shouts and chaos. The figure seemed unfazed by the gunfire, a predator unbothered by the primal fear that seeped into the air around them. As he scrambled to his feet, the realization struck him like a cold wave: they weren't just running from the law, they were all entangled in something far more sinister. What did the figure want? Why was it here? Answers screamed for attention, but all he could muster was a desperate survival instinct. Then, in the midst of the chaos, he realized the figure was moving toward the police. Was it protecting him? Nothing made sense anymore. The truth wavered like shadows cast by flickering lights. And just when he thought he understood the game being played, a piercing scream erupted, followed by silence, puncturing the madness with an aching chill. What had happened now? What lay hidden in the darkness? The questions clawed at his mind as he strained to see through the veil of chaos. But that scream had echoed a warning, a solemn bell tolling for everyone caught in the night's claws, and it was calling for him. Fear gripped him as the silence enveloped the chaos, the kind of silence that clings to your skin like a thief waiting to strike. He blinked hard, trying to peel away the dust settling in his eyes and clear the fog in his head. The figure stood immobile, its features shrouded in darkness and mystery, as if it were carved from shadow itself. As the frantic pace of officers echoed through the empty streets, the air thickened with adrenaline and trepidation. Heart racing, he dared to edge closer. Something deep inside him compelled him to understand. "Stay back!" A voice bellowed, dragging him to halt. It was another officer, face contorted in a mix of fear and authority. The gun remained trained not on the figure but on him. "Get on the ground." He dropped onto the pavement, the cold bite of the concrete jolting him back to reality. Just moments ago, he had careened down the street, driven to escape the terror that lurked behind. Now, he was just another piece in a game he hadn't signed up for. The cloaked figure turned its head slightly, a slow, deliberate movement, as if considering its next play. The scene stuttered into a tense stasis, police shouting commands, civilians still hiding in the shadows, and that haunting presence. Then a whisper, almost lost amid the clamor, drifted to him. Help! It was barely audible, a flicker of sound that seemed to pulse with urgency. He could hardly believe it. Was the figure really calling for help? "Hands where we can see them!" An officer shouted again, now moving closer, a determination edging into desperation. The figure took a step forward. His heart raced anew, pounding painfully in his chest, a sound drowned out by the frantic urge of the police. "Don't!" he cried, involuntarily, but his voice was drowned in the chaos. The cloaked figure moved faster than the eye could follow, darting between shadows, and he caught just a glimmer of its face, a gaunt, haunting visage, eyes like wells of darkness. Time seemed to elongate as the distance between it and the officers closed, and he held his breath, expecting the worst. Suddenly, shots rang out again, quick reporting blasts that shattered the still night. He watched as the figure slipped and twisted, almost fluid in its movements, narrowly avoiding the hail of bullets. The police yelled and regrouped, confusion setting in among them. How could they not hit it? Then chaos erupted once more. All the air seemed to crackle with tension. The figure leaped high, as if defying gravity itself. He could sense its energy, a dark aura that seemed to draw everyone's attention while holding a sinister purpose. "Stop!" another officer cried. But his voice was swallowed by a deeper sound, a thudding, rattling noise that began to resonate with every heartbeat. It was coming from below, as if the ground itself were groaning and waking. The world seemed to tremble, everything went both slow and fast, a blink of an eye between destruction and salvation. The figure was charging toward the approaching officers, its hand outstretched as if reaching for something far beyond them, beyond comprehension, and then it happened. A blinding flash of light, blinding in its intensity, exploded from the figure's hand. He shielded his eyes, breath burning in his lungs, and a guttural yell echoed through the chaos. When he managed to look again, confusion reigned supreme. The officers staggered back, eyes wide in shock and disbelief. The air hung thick, laden with the smell of burnt metal and something else, something ancient. In that moment, as the shadows danced with the flickering streetlights, he understood one undeniable truth: something truly insidious was beginning. What was coming for them? What would the cloaked figure demand next, and at what terrible cost? The answers lay just beyond their reach, tangled in the all-consuming night, calling out for someone to dare step forward and understand. The chaos around him pulsed like a living thing, the electric crackle of confusion filling the air. He lay pressed against the cold ground, heart racing, throat dry as dust. The blinding flash had momentarily stolen all clarity, warping the world into a surreal nightmare. Sirens screamed in the distance, their wails hammering against his skull, but the only sound that truly registered was the hollow echo of silence that followed the explosion. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see some monstrous thing creeping closer, but the figure had vanished. In its place stood agitated officers, eyes wide with a cocktail of fear and disbelief, their weapons now trembling in their grips. Some shouted into their radios, frantic voices trying to keep the chaos in check. "Get a perimeter. No one in or out." One officer yelled, urgency dripping from every word. He felt a surge of adrenaline. What if the figure hadn't just come to a sudden end? What if it had merely retreated into the shadows, waiting to strike again? He had to warn them, but soon they would turn their focus back on him, the terrified bystander. "Hey! It's gone!" he rasped, forcing himself to sit up. The world spun slightly, but he fought through it. "That thing isn't what you think. It's scared." It was shut up. A new voice barked, harsh with authority, cutting through the noise like a knife. The white-knuckled grip of an officer grabbed him by the arm, yanking him upright. "You want to get yourself killed, stay quiet or get the hell out of here." A warning, not a suggestion. And he understood he was just another pawn, caught in a game far beyond his control. He kept his mouth shut, but inside, a storm raged. The ground beneath him continued to tremor, a strange rumbling that felt alive. His gut twisted with unease. People from nearby buildings began to emerge, drawn to the scene like moths to a flame, danger and intrigue etched on their faces. And then, without warning, the darkness around them thickened, folding in on itself. A chill swept through the air. Gasps escaped the lips of those nearby as shapes began to shift in the blackness, flickers of movement darting just beyond the reach of the streetlights. "What is happening?" someone whispered, their voice trembling. He could see it now, figures emerging, just as the first glimmers of dread wormed their way into his mind. They were not just shadows, they were the very essence of unease, oscillating between perception and the unknown. The officers instinctively tightened their ranks, weapons raised again as if preparing for a second strike. But this time was different. This time, the fear had a sharper edge, creeping into their hearts like a poison. Suddenly, a horrible, twisting cry erupted from the shadows, primal and desperate, echoing through the air like a death knell. Hope shattered like glass. "Everyone back!" one officer shouted, panic spilling through his command. As the crowd surged away from the figure, he locked eyes with the unseen horrors, and something deep within him stirred. He wanted to run, to escape, to abandon the weight of the world, but a stronger pull arrested him, anchoring him in place. What were these creatures? Were they the answer to the cloaked figure's plea? "Stay! Don't move!" The words echoed in the dark, but he could feel the pull towards the unknown, a gravity he couldn't resist. The air fizzled with energy, and shadows closed in. He took a tentative step forward, heart pounding, wondering what would emerge from the depths of night, and whether understanding it would cost him everything. Something monstrous lurked just beyond sight, ready to leap into the light. What awaited him in the shadows? And was it too late to turn back? The answers hung just out of reach, twisting in the growing darkness. The ground quaked beneath his feet, sending tremors of panic racing up his spine. He stood there amidst the chaos, his breath hitching in his throat. Shadows danced around him, but the periphery of his vision blurred with fear. The crowd, a swarm of faces showing everything from awe to sheer terror, pushed back farther, leaving him isolated. "Get back! Get to safety!" An officer yelled, but the words felt distant, like they were trapped in some other reality. All he could think about was the ominous whisper of the darkness, the flickering forms that were still materializing from the depths. "Please, you have to listen," he shouted, his voice a plea against the rising tide of terror. "They're not monsters. They need us." The officer gripping his arm swung around, eyes fierce, spoken words laid bare as disbelief etched in his features. "And you think you know their intent? Get a grip." But he couldn't. Not now. As the cries from the lurking figures intensified, he felt himself being pulled further into the gripping unknown. There was something profound in that plea, something that twisted at his heart. Just then, a surge of wind whipped past them, carrying an unearthly howl that sank into the marrow of his bones. A ripple ran through the officers as if they sensed the danger crawling even closer. They shifted, weapons raised, their eyes darting toward the encroaching shadows that began to pulse with a life of their own. "Fall back! Fall back now!" The commanding officer's voice rang like a bell, but a knot formed in his gut. He understood that running wouldn't save them. The flickers of movement sharpened into clearer forms, twisted and organic, their skeletal outlines glittered beneath the streetlights. They curled and rolled like smoke, revealing elongated limbs that seemed almost human. Panic clouded his senses, but he couldn't tear his gaze from the restless shapes weaving ever closer. One lunged forward, shooting from the darkness, and an officer squeezed the trigger, but the shot went wide. The creature wailed, a gut-churning sound that reverberated through the air, causing him to stagger backwards. It was filled with anguish, raw and unfiltered. "Stop! It's hurt!" he shouted, words bursting from his mouth before he realized he had spoken. All eyes turned to him, disbelief and shock mingling with the growing menace. They were monstrous, yet he felt an echo of panic and desperation in their cries. Were they trapped here too? Officer Davis's grip on his arm tightened. "You're either insane or don't care if you die." "Maybe both," he replied, voice low, his heartbeat hammering in his ears as he thought about the cloaked figure from moments before. The fearlessness he was starting to feel coursed hotly through him. Was some unholy connection weaving them together? He stepped further into the fray, heart resolute against the encroaching tide. "Wait. We have to talk to them." Uncertainty washed over him as the phrases fell from his lips. Would anyone dare to trust him? Just then, from deep within the shadows, came another howl, this time guttural and filled with rage. The ground shook violently as the figures surged forward, claws outstretched, seeking something or someone to release their fury upon. Time slowed. The moment stretched thin, and his resolve wavered, but before he could back away, he saw their faces, horrified reflections of his own uncertainty staring back at him, raw and seeking. "What's happening?" he asked aloud, as if the shadows themselves might answer. And then he caught sight of something, a single flicker of light in the depths, just beyond the encroaching chaos, calling him like a distant star. "Follow me," he yelled, plunging forward into the pulsating dark. With the crowd and officers hesitating, he dove into the fold of shadows, determined to uncover the truth, what lay beyond the darkness. Would he discover salvation or doom? The figures closed in on him, their cries mingling in a terrifying harmony, and he could barely breathe under the weight of the unknown closing in. As he stepped deeper, one horrifying thought struck him. Was he leading them into the abyss, or was the abyss leading him to something unimaginable? The answer lingered just out of reach, always tantalizingly near, yet held back by shadows. The moment he crossed into the darkness, everything around him shifted. The air thickened, wrapping around him like a heavy quilt drenched in fear. Shadows flickered and churned, swirling like a tempest, while an unseen energy crackled with a mind of its own. A part of him wanted to scream, to run back into the safety of the crowd. But another part stronger, more primal urged him forward. He stumbled deeper into the void, almost blind to the figures now swirling around him. They had lost their monstrous forms, transforming into frantic sparks, struggling against some unseen force that held them captive. The guttural howls erupted again, each cry striking him like a physical blow. But now he sensed something more. Beneath the fury lay desperation, an agony that resonated so deeply within him. "Please," he whispered, more to himself than to the chaos creeping close. "What do you want?" Before he could catch his breath, the flickering light ahead pulsed strongly, calling him. His heart raced, a mixture of dread and undeniable curiosity. He moved instinctively toward it, driven by an almost magnetic pull. The figures around him shifted, their cries softening, melding into haunting harmonies. Somewhere in that storm of sensations, a longing rose up in him. Was he truly making a connection? As he stepped closer to the light, he could almost decipher their moans. Their cries seemed to weave together into a single narrative. A story begging to be heard. Suddenly, something surged from the depths. A form emerged, towering above the others, its eyes glowing with an intense sorrow that pierced through the dark. Time collapsed, each second stretching painfully as he felt the creature's gaze lock onto his. The air hummed with tension, he felt the weight of existence itself in that exchange. "Let me help you," he said, his voice trembling but steady. It was a commitment, one that could weave them into uncharted territory, but instead of responding, the creature lunged forward, its movement fluid and relentless. Panic rushed back into his veins as he stumbled, winded by the surge of its energy. The crowd outside the shadows gasped in horror, and he could see panic etched on their faces. They wanted him back. Safety, it was almost tangible. "Get out!" Officer Davis's voice exploded from behind him, firm but cracking under pressure. The pulse of chaos surged around him, and for the first time, doubt clawed at his heart. Should he flee? Could he abandon them? The creature hesitated, its glowing eyes flickering as if it heard the voices of both realms, the human shouts of fright and the soul-wrenching cries of its own kin. Something shifted. A tension hung in the air, cornered and ready to break. Instinctively, he took a step forward, desperate to bridge the gap. "No. Please. We can find a way." But the darkness seemed to deepen, swallowing that light, twisting it into shadow once more. With a howl that echoed of loss, the shadowy figures surged, rushing toward him with a collective anguish. It was a surge of desperation that sent chills down his spine, the flicker of hope faded like embers in wind. The crowd behind him was screaming now, some even crying out his name. Their voices mixed with the creature's cries, becoming a cacophony that vibrated through him. As he braced himself for what was to come, he realized the true horror. The boundaries were dissolving between the two worlds. Perhaps he wasn't meant to lead them to salvation. Suddenly, the earth trembled again, more violently this time, cracking open a chasm between realities. He gasped, the truth dawning on him like a cold splash of water. What if they weren't trapped here with him? What if he was the one trapped? With a surge of urgency, he lunged back toward the flickering light, but the shadows roared, the swell of darkness rising to consume him. "Hold on!" A voice called from behind, but he couldn't tell if it was Officer Davis or someone else. As cold fingers reached for him, he felt the very ground beneath him begin to split. Was he about to be lost forever, or would he uncover a truth that united them all? The tall figure loomed closer, the air heavy with the weight of their fate. Just as he was about to scream, to reach out to one last flicker of hope, the abyss opened wide. What fate awaited him on the other side? Would he fall into darkness or emerge into light? He fell. The ground vanished beneath him, and he was swallowed whole by the darkness. As he tumbled, a strange sensation overtook him, the feeling of weightlessness, like floating through a void where time ceased to exist. His heart thundered in his chest, both terrified and hopeful. When he landed, the world around him was different. The shadows pulsed, morphing into something more substantial. He barely recognized the place. It was a twisted reflection of reality. Faint echoes of the crowd outside whispered like distant thunder, but their cries were now muffled, lost somewhere far above. He scrambled to his feet, disoriented, and looked around. This place was alive, breathing with frenetic energy, each pulse resonating with a pattern of its own. The light he was drawn to before flickered in the distance, but it was no longer just a beacon. It had transformed into a swirling vortex. "Where am I?" he murmured, breathless with dread. The air felt as if it was charged with electricity, static clinging to his skin. Suddenly, the figures he recognized, the ones in despair, began to coalesce around him. Their faces were twisted by agony, mouths open in silent screams. It was a grim assembly, mourning collective losses he could not begin to comprehend. "Help us!" they pleaded, their voices a haunting symphony that enveloped him. Each syllable struck him like a dagger, raw with pain, desperation. "No!" he shouted back instinctively, although he didn't even know how to help them. "What do you want from me?" Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, until the towering figure emerged from the shadows once more. Its glowing eyes bore into him, searching, pleading almost. It raised a hand, fingers curling like wretched vines. Slowly, it traced the air, weaving tight patterns until they glowed with a vibrancy that fired his resolve. Suddenly, images flashed before his eyes, scenes of violence, chaos, loss. Each image filled him with dread. He saw the source of their anguish, tragedy after tragedy, lives cut short, dreams extinguished. He gasped, feeling the weight of their collective pain pressing down on him, wrapping around him like a vice. "Please, we were wronged," the tall figure spoke, its voice echoing with untold sorrow. "We can't move on. You must help us remember, to remind the living." The crowd surged in a restless wave, reacting to his hesitation. He was drowning in despair as a dark truth twisted in his gut. He could see the cost of inaction staring back at him. This was not just about him, it was about them. Their cries. Their stories. Okay, I'll help." He finally shouted, adrenaline mixed with determination igniting within him. "Tell me what I need to do." As the shadows drew closer, the air began to crackle with renewed energy. The tall figure nodded, its sorrowful expression softening. "You must face the truth of our stories. Only then can the bridges be rebuilt, and you can find your way back." With that, the darkness shifted again, morphing into the very visions he had witnessed, moments frozen in time. Each scene pulled him closer, deeper into their anguish. The figures reached out with faded hands, desperate and hopeful. He steeled himself and stepped toward the first glowing image, and in that dark moment, he felt the ground break apart again beneath him, this time welcomingly. And then, as his world began to spiral into kaleidoscopic shapes, a horrifying realization struck him: each truth he uncovered could either free them or ensnare him forever. Where would this journey lead him? Would he be able to save not only the lost souls but also himself? The chasm reformed once more, and he found himself teetering on the edge of revelation, ready to dive into darkness for the sake of light. What truths awaited him there, and would he be strong enough to face them? He plunged face first into the vision. Tumbling through layers of sorrow and despair, he landed in the heart of chaos, a street crammed with people shouting, laughing, living, unaware of the eerie fog that cloaked the edges of their world. The air buzzed with urgency, a sharp contrast to the gloom he just left. But even here, something sinister thrummed beneath the surface. He looked around, heart racing. Neon lights flickered above, almost chiding in their brightness. He was in the middle of a carnival, but it felt wrong. Laughter echoed in the air, bright and carefree, yet the crowd's faces were obscured, shrouded in shadow. He moved, feeling compelled to push forward, to find the thread of truth buried beneath the celebration. Then, he saw her, a girl, no more than 16, with haunted eyes that spoke of dreams shattered. She stood alone, the joy around her fading into nothingness. Her lips barely parted, and a whisper faded through the clamor like a prayer. "Help me, please." He stepped towards her, instinct screaming at him to reach out. She looked up, a shimmering image entwined in the city's pulsating rhythm, and in that moment, their eyes locked. Shadows flared, swirling around her like a storm, dark tendrils grasping at her. "Stay away!" she screamed as the shadows tightened. He felt a chilling jolt. This was more than just a vision, it was raw and real. The shadows were feeding on her fear, her pain. "What happened to you?" he called, desperate. "They don't stop, they can't be defeated," she gasped, her voice laced with terror. "You're not safe here. You need to leave." "Leave?" Panic bubbled in his chest. "No. I can't abandon you." He felt the pull of the vortex as it trembled, drawing him back. But with every fiber of his being, he fought against it. He had to stay. The truth was somewhere in this haze, desperate to be unearthed. Suddenly, the carnival lights blinked out, plunging the space into darkness. The laughter faded, leaving a heavy silence that resonated like a funeral bell. A low growl surged from the shadows, the darkness alive, intent on consuming. "Stand back!" he screamed, feeling the rush of adrenaline as the shadows curled and slithered toward him, instinctively shielding the girl behind him. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear, he couldn't let fear claim them both. As he stepped forward, a surge of energy whirled around him. The shadows recoiled, hissing like steam escaping a kettle. "Tell me your story," he yelled into the abyss, conscious that only by confronting the darkness could he empower the light. "You have to see," she cried, fearfully urging. "You must remember what happened." Images flashed around him, saturated with color and dread. An accident, a horrible twist of fate, a night that had spiraled into disaster. Blaring sirens echoed through the flashes, an overwhelming sense of urgency mixed with the screams of the crowd. He felt it all, the bone-chilling fear, the chaotic rush. But just as clarity struck, another shadow loomed larger, an impending darkness waiting to tighten its grip. "Together," he whispered, holding out his hand to the girl. "We can face this. We can fight." But as their hands connected, the shadows reared back with a furious howl, and something shifted in the air. He could hear echoes of cries for help, mixing with a chorus of despair that was threatened to drown them. What lay ahead loomed darker than he'd anticipated, and in that moment, he understood it was not just the girl's truth he had to face. As they stood together at the swirling edge of the vortex, hearts pounding, he realized the haunting specter wasn't done with him. Would he find the power to save them both, or would he vanish into the very darkness he craved to dispel? The shadows crackled ominously, signaling another plunge into the unknown, deeper and darker. What awaited him on this treacherous path, and what sacrifices would be demanded to survive? The shimmering light of the vortex began to dim, casting an uneasy glow as the shadows surged around them. The girl's grip tightened on his hand, a silent plea for hope, a desperate thread keeping them anchored. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "We have to uncover the truth," she replied, courage threading through her fear. "Make the darkness remember." The tendrils of shadow twisted ominously, trying to wrap around them. They were the embodiment of fear, feeding off uncertainty, but he could feel something else within their grasp, a flicker of hidden pain, buried deep beneath the surface. There was a story here, a collective history wrapped in sorrow that demanded to break free. "Okay," he gulped, heart racing as he focused intently, willing himself to connect with the shadows swirling nearby. "What happened to you? Show me." As he steeled himself, something within the vortex began to shift. A vision unfolded, a young boy, no older than 10, laughing with abandon as he tossed a bright red ball into the air. Feet of running laughter echoed, carefree and joyous, until a siren pierced through the laughter like a knife. The boy's face twisted from joy to confusion, then horror. He saw the chaos, felt the despair saturate the air. It was a car crash, a consequence marked forever in small lives. Then the scene warped again. This time, he found himself amidst a funeral. Mourners draped in shadows stood around an open casket, faces obscured and sorrow etched in every line. The little girl, the same girl, stood alone, tears streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, he knew her pain. Those shadows were deeply intertwined with loss and regret, not just hers but of the lives trapped in that terrible accident. "I see it," he shouted, a pulse of energy surging through him. "I see what happened. We have to make them remember. They need to heal." His resolve intensified as the darkness stirred violently, the whispers merging into howls of anguish beneath the chaos surrounding them. With renewed determination, he glanced at the girl. "We'll take their pain and turn it into power. Let us pull them from the shadows." He squeezed her hand, pulling her closer as the flickering lights of the vortex sparked back to brilliance. Together, they stepped forward, channeling their shared strength into an energy beam that surged into the abyss. "Remember," he shouted as the connection intensified, resonating with a force that shook the ground beneath them. The shadows recoiled, writhing and crying, but he could feel the stories rising, breaking the surface as light poured through the darkness. One by one, echoes of lost souls emerged, their stories spilling into the air like fireflies escaping a jar. "Help us, don't forget us, we were here." The cries began to mix with a different melody, a harmony of voices emerging through the sorrow. Together, he and the girl drew the painful memories together, shaping them into something whole. In that moment, the scream of their anguish transformed into cries of release, rising like smoke signaling freedom. He could feel it, the weight lifting from the figures around them, their burdens shared and transformed. "Yes! Yes!" he yelled, letting his fear and determination blend into the light that enveloped them. "You can escape this. You are not alone." And then, suddenly, a blinding flash erupted from the shadows as the darkness twisted and surged, giving way to brilliant light. The air hummed with energy, swirling around them in perfect resolution. The figures began to dissolve, bursting with joy and relief, their pain evaporating into palpable warmth. Together, they stepped back from the edge, watching as the vortex pulsed glimmers of countless souls being set free. Laughter mingled with tears, the shadows dissipating into radiant wisps of color, fluttering like fallen leaves carried by the breeze. Finally, he turned to the girl, breathless yet triumphant. "You did it. We did it." But she only smiled, her face illuminated with a soft glow that carried both healing and sorrow. "We faced it together. Thank you," she murmured, her form beginning to flicker like a candle about to go out. "No. Don't leave." Panic clutched at his chest, rushing in to fill the void of loss. "You have to return," she replied, eyes shining bright. "This is your journey. You've freed us. Now go. Remember us." With those words, it was as if time folded in on itself. He found himself pulled back into the swirling currents of the vortex, the warmth of the light dissolving into the shadows behind him. Images of the joyous boy, mournful funeral, and the haunting carnival clanged in his mind, each a vital reminder. And then, in a single breath, he landed back on the asphalt, surrounded by the shimmering remnants of the night. The chaos transformed. Officers stood bewildered, the crowd in awe, the lingering energy of release buzzing in the air. His heart raced as he spotted Officer Davis inch closer, still processing the aftershocks of the surreal chase. "What happened?" His voice quivered with awe, and he could feel the weight of a million eyes on him as the night unfolded around their small circle. "Hope," was all he could say, chest heaving as he took a step forward. "Hope and redemption." The shadows of the night began to dissolve as sirens faded into the distance, leaving echoes of stories whispered in every corner of the city. The chase was over. The darkness had transformed into possibility, and though he didn't know what awaited him next, he sensed clarity rising like dawn, the lessons of the night already etched in his heart. As he walked away from the chaos, he realized he was not just a man who ran from danger. He had learned the truth about fear and pain, he was ready to face whatever came next. It was then he understood, he would carry their memories, shared in unity, shining as guideposts along his path. Now, forget not. The end may just be the beginning. Subscribe immediately to stay tuned for the next exclusive stories. Don't wait. Smash that like button now to shout out our victory against despair. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about tonight's wild chase. Instantly share this video with at least 5 friends who absolutely need to witness this powerful conclusion. This is your moment to support us. Every action matters. You need to be a part of this journey.